Jack didn't bother to brush the dirt off of his rotten suit. Some may say cleanliness is next to gold godliness, but figured to be the big man upstairs or even the head honcho of hell that didn't factor into his current situation. There was a spent bullet ratting around his empty skull. After all, he couldn't even recall ever seeing anything resembling a tunnel of light or even a sucking pit blacker than a night. Besides that, was digging from the wrong end of the grave was tiring work, and he still had one more to do that night. With an empty eye sockets, he spotted the handle of a shovel partly hidden under the dead and decaying leaves. He assumed whoever buried them in there had accidentally left it behind, thus making the spot where his remains had been hidden. Not to bothering to consider the irony of it all, he let out a breathless sigh of relief, simply glad he didn't have to dig any more with his hands. And why this was resurrection was a mystery to him, but somehow he knew that he had to be done and had nowhere to go. He only hoped that he could hold together long enough just to complete his task. With his limbs lacking connective tissue or ligaments to hold them together, he leaned down and picked up the rusty tool. Despite the absence of the muscle tissue, he gripped his handle tightly and rested its long wooden shaft upon his bony shoulder. Defying more than a few natural laws, all he did with those things was then turned away, shambling through the woods towards his final destination. He had a long road to travel and another grave to dig that night. He clumsily shuffled his way through the overgrown thicket at the edge of the woods. Past the dead-end sign, he headed up directly in the center of May Street. Children dressed in all manner of colorful costumes walked along the sidewalks. Plenty of them gone to the animated corpse of Jack Marlin, but no one saw his appearance as coming off the zombie apocalypse. In fact, he felt quite well with the other ghoulish creatures roaming around the streets in that night. There was really no better night for his return topside. After all, pretty much anything goes on the 31st of October. One kid made up look like a hamburger yelled out to him, "Super scary costume, Mr. Bickle. You've really outdone yourself this year." Jack didn't know who Mr. Bickle was, but he took the misplaced compliment as a sign as he did the resistance on trek through his town. If it weren't for his jawbone lying somewhere in the back thicket, he might have responded with a "right back at ya, kid." Instead, he ignored the boy and continued his slow, arduous walk through the street. He figured it was probably for the best that he didn't try to speak. None of the trick-or-treaters seemed to have daunted on by the thing, held together with nothing more than a filthy, rotten clothes that was soon stronger than death itself. But even a single guttural grunt or growl might have inspired an unwanted scrutiny. The last thing if he ever needed was an angry mob intent on doing some zombie bashing. By the time he had reached the opposite end of May Street, the sidewalks were vacant, and most of the front doors were illuminated only by the moonlight. Turning left, he had took the sidewalk to avoid attracting too much attention. On the next few hours, crawled by the place, matching his own sluggish stride. Other than a few blaring car horns and one inaudible slur, he walked around unnoticed and underrated. Crossing the street towards the end of his journey, he tripped on the curb and did a face plant on the sidewalk. As he rose to his feet, something by the size of a fist slipped out and ragged his clothing and burst open the cement. Thinking another part of him had fallen off, he looked down to see if it could be salvaged. Lying on the sidewalk was a rotten piece of cloth, surrounded by charred bits of bone. He only had to compare then to his own hands to confirm if they were broken finger bones. The knuckles only being the bits not touched by fire, made him think of popcorn for some strange reason. A phantom pain where his stomach used to be stopped him in short reminiscing about his past life. With the swing of his shovel, he scattered the bones, not giving another second chance to consider the bones' significance. He moved on down towards his destination. A shaggy dog with dirty matted fur came upon him about a block from his destination. It followed along behind him, probably hoping there was still some marrow left in his bones, and he shooed away with the business of the end of the shovel when it got too close to comfort. If anyone's burying anything tonight, Fido, it sure ain't hell gonna be you. The thought made him chuckle awkwardly as he came upon a railroad crossing. Walking over to the tracks brought up memories of his wife. He always crossed her fingers when passing over the train tracks. She insisted he did it too, but never paid attention along. In fact, he always chided for her for being so superstitious. Suddenly overwhelmed with regret, he did it for her and lost a finger for efforts. Not bothering to pick it up, he continued on. For the second time at night, he felt a strange tingling in his bones. Shrugging off as it dealt welling inside, he quickened his pace, uncertain with whatever was holding him together in an expiration date. He had stopped for a moment when he came to the edge of the cemetery, gazed out over the landscape. He wasn't present with what entered here. Well, the only way he would find that counts, but somehow he knew on the other side of the property was an empty coffin and a headstone with its name on it, and right beside it was where his wife rested. She was alive the last time he saw her, but in the same mysterious way, he knew where his grave was. He also knew she was dead as well. Walking amongst the grave markers and headstones gave him a little taste of tranquility no unmarked grave could ever give him, to finally let him be at rest beside the woman he loved and always wanted. He didn't want to know who had dug him up and buried him in the woods at the end of May Street, nor did he understand why anyone would do such a thing. He decided it didn't matter, because he had taken matters into his own hands and would finally be at peace very soon. With the shovel gripped tightly in his dead, cold hands, he stepped up to his headstone. Etched into the stone was his name, the timeline of his life, and simple message: beloved son, father, and husband. Beside that was his wife's stone. He brushed a reddened leaf on top of it and turned back to his plot. Time to get back to being dead and buried, he thought, as he sunk his head into the shovel ground. He pressed it deeper with his foot, heaved out the first shovel full of dirt. He tossed it to the side. A voice broke the silence surrounding the graveyard. How exactly do you intend on pulling the dirt back when you're done? Jack spun around to discover a tall man in plain black t-shirt with blue jeans, not seeming the least bit shocked by the animated corpse of Jack Marlin standing before him. He exclaimed, "Ah, there's my shovel," he said before snatching it from Jack's hands. Without a second hesitation, he swung the shovel around and slammed Jack at the back of the head. The dead man bellowed him inhumanely and stumbled to the side. Jack, just as he regained his footing, the stranger swung the shovel upward, catching him square in the chin and dropping him hard into his back. Seconds later, a boot pressed heavily on his chest. He could hear his ribs cracking as he desperately clawed at the man's leg. The stranger stabbed the shovel into the ground beside the dead man's head and grabbed him by the arms. With a great heave, he tore them out of their sockets, tossed them to his side. The writhing corpse of Jack Marlin let out a ghastly screech that echoed throughout the cemetery. The stranger grabbed the shovel and, without a second thought, drove it straight into the dead man's neck. Jack's head rolled free and nestled on the devoid that he just dug moments before. Crouching down, the man had picked up the severed head and spat in its eye sockets. "You don't remember me, but I wish you did. The next time you see me, it'll be like we never met before. Sadly, hexes can do so much. You're probably wondering who I am, but my name is not important. Just so you know, I am the great-grandson of Hilda Swanson. You at least remember, right? She's one of the many people you swindled with. Well, yeah. Well, she has a message for you." With that said, he sat Jack's skull on the grass, pulled a little bit of the pouch with a pack of matches from his pocket. Within a pouch was just a fine red powder he poured in the circle around the skull. Jack, being unwillingly witness he was, he could do nothing but watch the little man take a sack from another pocket, and guessed it was well contained seconds before the man opened it and dumped the contents into the grass. Lying there before him were bits of yellowed finger bones. The man placed the bones around his skull with the knuckle of each end sticking outside of the red circle. Mumbling a few inaudible words, he struck out a match across the top hat of Jack's head and dropped it into the circle. A green flame burst to life and quickly encircled the skull of Jack Marlin. The flames rose up around him and flickered threateningly. Jack woke up as if it was a dream. He was sitting in the desk in his office, with a loaded revolver gripped tightly in his hand. A loud voice came from the other side of the office door. "I repeat, this is the police. We have a warrant for your—" The voice was cut off, just as an elderly woman in a long yellow dress appeared before him. Her dress was flowed around her, as if she were underwater, but her gray and black hair didn't move an inch as she strode up to his desk. Don't you worry about them, sugar. They ain't coming unless you give them the go-ahead." Jack blurted out, "Who are you? What's going on?" She leaned over to the desk, looked at him right in the eyes. "The name's Hilda Swanson. You and me need to talk." In a flash, everything came back to him. He was reliving the last moments of his life. The woman was new, but everything else was just as it never happened before. He had just gotten off the phone with the head of the security, who had called to tell him that the police were headed up the elevator to deliver a warrant for his arrest. The realization was almost too much for Jack to take in, but he eventually came to his senses. I shot myself." "That's right, sugar, but you fret over just that. Ain't nothing carved in stone that can't be undone, but with the ritual, right?" "But how? This can't be real. I mean—" "Shh, sugar. It's simple than baking a pie. You just gotta stand up and open that door." Jack just sat there, staring at the ethereal figure standing before him. "But what would that do?" Hilda then shook her head in frustration. "Seems like I gotta spell it out for you. You go ahead and let the men in here, so things can move as they should have in the first place. Things should have started sorting themselves out from here." "But I don't want to go to jail." Hilda slammed her fist down in the expensive mahogany desk. "Oh, you damn coward! You'd rather leave this mess for your family to clean up? Yep, I guess you would. It's what you've done before. So what are you waiting for? Go ahead, put the gun in your mouth, pull that trigger." Jack loaded the revolver in hand. He had wondered how things have gone so wrong. Convinced he'd never get caught, he dug himself deeper and deeper until he inevitably ended where he was deciding between whatever to eat the bullet or face the shame humiliation awaiting for him on the other side of that door. Discovering the courage that he didn't have for himself, he stood up and walked around his desk. He dropped the revolver at his feet, stepped up to the door. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the doorknob. Hilda began to cackle wildly as he swung the door. There were no police standing there or even his secretary typing away at her desk. Instead, all he saw was a graveyard he walked all night to reach. "You damn fool! Ain't nothing you can't undo what you've done!" Hilda exclaimed, between bouts of insane laughter. He spun around to comfort her. "I don't understand. You—" The old woman's laughter died with a twisted grin, replaced through the laughs lines on her face. "Yep, I said what I said, but you can only say I could watch you blow your brains out again. This is the first time you ever chose this option, too. You took long enough, but it won't change anything. You dead, and so am I. But nothing, sugar. I died waiting for those in charge to figure out where you hid all your stolen gains, and so did plenty of people you cheated. No doubt you locked it all away in some Swiss bank, and ain't nobody ever gonna get it. So that all leaves the little old me with the chance of once a year to shit in your cornflakes. And believe you and me, that's just what I am about to do for as long as my kin keep pumping out babies and teaching them all about you. As long as they keep the tradition alive on Halloween, you ain't never getting any rest of beneath that fancy headstone." Utterly dumbfounded, Jack could do nothing but sputter and gasp in shock. She had never been the best in peace, and he believed her. He wondered on now that moment how long had that whole sordid affair that had been playing itself out, but he didn't bother asking. He doubted she'd tell him about what he didn't think would really he wanted to know. Lost in a mere self-pity, he failed to notice Hilda step up behind him. Raising up the balls of her feet, she leaned over with a whisper in his ear. "All that's left is you to get back into the ground. See you next year, Jack." With his name barely out of her mouth, she leaned onto him hard and shoved him through the door. About an hour later, Jack was once again dead to the world and settled back to unmarked graves in the woods. Hilda's great-grandson tossed a small bag of bound with a lever quartered into the corpse, with the contents crackled and hummed with the promise of dark and impossible threats. He then lifted the hole. When his task was done, he laid the shovel beside and the mound covered with all of its leaves and branches. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, he uttered 5 words that ended every Halloween with, "See ya next year, Jack."